Welcome to the Research and Scientific Software Working Group for July 8th, 2025. And we're just talking about, got some new folks. Welcome. And just put the notes in the chat there. And I don't know if Sal and Najira want to take a minute to introduce yourselves. You don't have to,
I'll
but
go first.
hmm.
Sal here. Usually my open source contributions are more around cybersecurity, but strong background, full PhD in the data science space. So I enjoy just picking up, especially my data viz skills. And I used to run years ago, at the time, the largest meetup in all of Washington, D.C. for data viz.
Wow,
Um,
that is a
yeah,
claim to fame right there.
it was really cool. We had some great hacks. So yeah, I've been showing up here just because I like the space and I like the projects that you're working on. And I brought Ajiro here because they're getting good open source experience. So I will let them jump in as well.
Hello, everybody. My name is Adria Genekume, and I'm from Nigeria. I think I met Sal, and Sal introduced me to the data science working group of CHAOSS. So I decided to join, and it's been going well so far. Nice meeting everybody again. And for those I've not met before, nice meeting you for the first time. I hope we are able to do a whole lot of things together. I'm in the cybersecurity space too, though, like from Sal, and I just decided to join the space with a little data science experience and try to get into the open source space.
Well, welcome,
Yeah,
welcome.
welcome.
So
Thank
in the
you.
past few meetings,
Should
yeah.
we,
So in the past,
should,
no,
should,
go ahead.
well, I was just going to say,
Yeah.
let's do introductions too, since,
Sure, sure.
we-
Yes, that's
oh,
probably
correct.
polite.
Oh, yeah.
That would be the well-mannered way to go, Dan. So do that. I'll let you lead.
Okay. Sorry. So I wasn't sure if you said I'll let you lead or I'll lead, but
Oh, yeah.
okay. So I am Dan Katz. I'm at University of Illinois. I've been doing a bunch of different stuff around scientific software kind of since I was a grad student in the late 1980s, and currently work on a open source scientific software project called, actually, I would say open source research software project called Parsel, Parsl, which is a parallel scripting library that lets you do some stuff in Python and parallel on different kinds of resources. And I also do a lot of different community stuff. So I'm the steering committee chair of the yes, Research Software Alliance. I'm a co-founder and associate editor in chief of the Journal of Open Source Software. I co-founded the U.S. Research Software Engineer Alliance organization. Sorry, having problems with names of things today. And
Yeah.
work with Greg on Corsa, which he will probably talk about.
Thanks, Dan. Um, since you introduced Greg, I will let Greg go next.
Yeah, sure. I'm Greg Watson. I'm a group leader at Oak Ridge National Lab, and I run the application engineering group. So most of my time is helping group members develop applications for domain science. We partner with various other domain scientists at the lab primarily and other institutions, and we develop a range of different software. I would say, probably all of our software actually is open source, unless it's got some sort of connection with defense or something like that. But the majority of it is open source. And as Dan mentioned, so we're involved in this organization called CORSA, which is the Center for Open Source Research, Software Stewardship and Advancement, or it could be the other way around. But anyway, it's part of a larger organization called CHAOSS, which is the Consortium for the Advancement of Scientific Software. And so all these have lots, these organizations all have software in the names because it's all about, and scientific software particularly, because it's an effort the DOE kicked off to try and figure out how to sustain a large number of scientific software projects that primarily were funded by DOE. But DOE doesn't want to get into the business of maintaining software. They want to just create new software. And so they're like, okay, well, we just want to clear out the space and just keep creating new and more software. Oh, but there's this other software that, so many people rely on, and it underpins a lot of the other scientific software. So I guess we better do something about keeping that going. And so, sort of a bit of an afterthought, um, uh, they created these organisations to try and figure out how to make it sustainable. And so that sort of brings me around to why we're even involved with chaos. And that is because we are both chaos and Corsa very interested in metrics, and we want to use metrics to understand the sustainability of this software. And we're trying to figure out what metrics are appropriate, how to collect those metrics, how to use those metrics and interpret them, and so forth. So that's, I guess, what brings us to this forum.
Thanks, Greg. And I guess, Don, do you want to go next? Since I've been calling on everyone else besides myself, might as well maintain that consistency.
Well, I'm Dawn Foster. I'm the director of data science for the CHAOSS project. I actually know everyone on this call, so we can probably just skip my introduction.
Yeah. And I'm Sean at the University of Missouri, and similarly, I think at first I can't spell Missouri apparently. Um, I think I do know everyone else on the call as well, but yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of Chaos. So I maintain Augur, etc. So I put an agenda item on the start here. I think just to kick off a discussion about how basically I just want to share one of the things my students and I have been working on for about a year now is the development and testing evaluation of computational models to try to classify open source projects in different segments. So we look at we certainly observed qualitatively that scientific open source projects and research open source projects have different activity profiles and metric indicator levels, I suppose you could say, related to sustainability. So sustainability for scientific and research software doesn't look the same statistically as sustainability for corporatized open source, which similarly doesn't look the same statistically as the work that happens oddly inside open source program offices that are centered at universities. And so, we want to be able to understand the degrees or the sort of the relative sustainability or life cycle state of different projects. And if for those of you who have done computational modeling, you know that the best way to do that is to have some hand-coded projects that fit into different categories. And so we've started as basically our evaluation set, the CNCF, because they have some very nicely classified categories of sandbox, incubating, and graduated. And over the course of the last year, a number of projects have moved between sandbox and incubating, and between incubating and graduated. And a few new sandbox projects have actually emerged. So it gives us sort of an ability to do that kind of analysis and build those models. Um, but when it comes to the evaluation part, we've applied qualitative coding to other projects that are not in the CNCF in the corporatized space, and used the CNCF's rules for making those classifications, and sought input from a number of people that we've interviewed as well. And so we've got reasonably good accuracy on the models, which basically would go through a bunch of chaos metrics and put projects we technically know nothing about into a category. And but in the course of doing that and thinking about um, the different sort of corners of open source in scientific and research software, in government and nonprofits and the corporatized space, and how these profiles are different, it it occurs to me that, while one of the goals is possibly predictive classification, the evaluation and the sort of I think I'm encountering or experiencing possible limits in the utility of computation for making these classifications, and also thinking that perhaps the question may not be a solvable or answerable question, but at least not perfectly solvable or answerable, but it could be, I think it could be useful. So I guess this is a sort of a modeling platitude, which is models are neither good nor bad, they're just more or less useful. So I guess with that long introduction, I would say that right now my group is wrestling with that, and I just wanted to sort of throw this problem out here because I think conceptually, at least, a lot of us do struggle with um, that same sort of set of questions, perhaps framed differently. How do we know what the sustainability of a project is, and what are some of the signals we can use at some degree of scale to try to figure that out?
So I haven't done any modeling around this, but if you have any questions about the process that the CNCF uses to go from sandbox to incubating to graduated, I was actually directly involved in the process of promoting projects at the CNCF for several years, up until just a couple of months ago. So just to offer, if you have any questions about that process, I'm happy to
Oh,
help.
thank you. Thank you.
I'm also curious. So it sounds like you're leaning on Linux Foundation, like maturity cycles. Are you then using those maturity cycles and metrics on non like open source foundation stewarded projects or like institution backed projects now?
Right. So, yes, is the short answer. So, we've taken a bunch of projects from Microsoft, Google, Red Hat, and a few other corporate enterprises because that's where Chaos has the largest footprint right now. So, I also think that the modeling activity is to some extent easier with the LF projects because they have a more consistent collection of behavioral patterns. Um, Whereas there's, I think, more idiosyncrasy in some of the other corners of open source. So this is a good place to start. Um, so yeah, so we've used interviews with folks at those different companies to help classify some of their projects into corresponding CNCF categories, and use those as what we call a transfer learning set. So basically we build models which are stored in pickle files and H5 files, and then we apply them to projects that we didn't classify at all. Well, we classified them manually, but then we see how well we do. And we're hitting about 80% on using the models from CNCF to classify the corporatized projects that were manually classified from these other corners of the universe. We've also looked at Apache as an evaluation set, but it's a little tricky because Apache only has two categories. So there's a little bit of uh, we have to sort of estimate to some degree, and it actually kind of is okay, but obviously mapping there's an impedance mismatch between the numbers 2 and 3.
So,
Yeah.
Sean, when you talk, well, okay. So I think like model is probably the most overloaded term in computer science.
Hmm.
Well, probably not because there's probably more, but it certainly is one of them. Um,
Algorithm, maybe.
what classification are you doing, and like what are the classes that you're putting software into?
Sure. So the CNCF has Sandbox, which is kind of their beginning, incubating, which is a way of saying, hey, it's been in the sandbox, we've played with it. We're actually going to commit some resources to trying to develop this project. And then graduated, which roughly I would say these are projects that are being somewhat widely used and have reached, there are certain gates, very specific gates in the CNCF that I think sounds like Don could speak more clearly to. Um, and once they're graduated projects are ones that become part of, I would say, core. They're definitely part of core infrastructure. There can be incubating and even sandbox projects that are obviously on a trajectory to be core infrastructure. But the graduated ones, I think I would characterize as core infrastructure that a lot of enterprises use. And so those are the three CNCF categories.
Okay, so I guess the maybe then two kind of quick follow-up questions is so one of them is I'm assuming the projects already are, I don't know, labeled as one of those categories to begin with. So you're just
That's
trying to
right.
understand if this model kind of matches the reality in some sense.
Right. So the first test, the first evaluation we do, which isn't really an evaluation, but we do internal validation, right? So it's kind of a classic um, computational modeling thing where we hold back 20% and then
Right. Okay.
test.
So, and then, so then my second question, I don't mean this in a negative way, but
That's
what's the value in doing this, or what do you want to get out of this?
sure. The value in doing this, or the motivation, if you will, is to be able to help organizations or projects individually that really have no idea where they are in the liminal space of open source software project maturity. Like, so I've got a project, I don't know how to interpret my metrics. I don't know what other projects that have survived or been sustainable I am like or not like. And so when people come to Chaos, for example, and try to interpret their metrics, oftentimes there's an initial disappointment that they experience because we don't put things in like a red, yellow, green category. We don't tell you how your project's doing. We leave that to your judgment or your interpretation of the metrics. And I think I would say that most of the people who start out using chaos metrics are trying to answer that same category of questions but don't have the experience that folks that have been involved in chaos have to make those judgments. So it's to try to help, I would say, people new to sustainability assessment, uh, put stuff they care about in a rough bucket.
Hmm.
Okay.
Um, One of the things it's making me think, because a lot of my PhD was over AFNI, open source software that's had stable releases for like 26 years now, and they're very good, very strong, good community around them.
What's it
And
called?
it's called AFNI. I'll throw a link to it. It's brain imaging
Okay.
software. It's
Okay. All
actually
right. Yeah.
at the end, but I'll give a link.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so a lot of the projects that I see come out of academia tend to have short-tailed on the contributions instead of long tails. So it's the contributing
Absolutely.
community. So we can pull those stats out. But when you're looking, at least within the incorporated projects, um, I think one of the things that we don't pick up in our stats that has the biggest effect is security, absolutely, or an awareness of security. So when we were running reports through Sonatype, the single most predictive metric on like longitudinal success of a project and incubational success of a project is called MTTU. That's mean time to update. And what that is simply calculating not how often the project updates, but within any release cycle, how often or how quickly do they update the open source projects that they intake, because it's the primary security vector for them. And it has a huge, huge impact on whether or not they're able to graduate at the end because they have to undergo a like complete threat model in order to be considered graduated. So that's part of the story that I think might be really important, and it's one that's going to be out of the context of academic projects typically. But it might be worth incorporating or bringing in that statistical knowledge.
It's interesting. I mean, we have certainly that's one of the statistics that we've used. We look at dependency age as a proxy for, I think, what you're describing. So it's not mean time to update, but rather we use a statistic called Libyear, which I think is pretty similar. Um, Basically, a Libyear is if you're using the second most recent release, the lib-year statistic is how much time is between the release that you're using and the most current release. So, if you're using the most current release, but it's 9 years old, you have a lib-year of 0. You're still using the most current release. And of course, it's a separate question about whether or not this non-maintained project is something you should have in your portfolio, but I use that as an extreme example. And then if it's just 6 months, it's 6 months. And so there's actually a place on the 8 knot dashboard um, that some folks use that you can actually see the dependency age distribution, which I think is pretty similar to what you're describing. So like just, yeah, so like basically the way that 8 knot puts it together is things that are over a year old, percent that's up to date. So this project happens to be Augur, I think, and it breaks down pretty evenly there. And then less than 6 months, 6 months to a year is smaller. So yeah, this is kind of how we see it.
Yeah,
This is kind of the way
perfect.
that the categories um, break down.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I mean, certainly security is, I like it as a sort of a, this is the word, I'm looking for a word. It's like it's an indicator, but it's not a direct indicator. It's kind of a sort of a signal, I suppose, of attentiveness is something that actually can kill an open source project. If it's not secure, then people can't deploy it, for example, or if it's got a bunch of open CVEs against it, or its dependencies specifically, which is probably more likely for most scientific projects, then there's probably a constraint on deployment. I'm curious because, when the work I've done talking with scientific and research software folks, security is certainly a topic, but I haven't heard its significance described this way before. And maybe I just haven't been listening to folks like Craig and Dan carefully enough. Um, but
I
I'm
can say
curious.
that within the CNCF process, the promotion process, the security review is one of the most important things that they consider when it's going from, for example, sandbox to incubating or incubating to graduated, along with a
Mhm,
few other things like it goes through, governance reviews and a few others, but the security reviewing their security processes and
mhm.
how they handle security is pretty important.
Yeah, that makes sense for core infrastructure because that's what CNCF stands for. Um, but it's not something I've heard folks talk about in the scientific and research software communities. The concerns I've heard more often are just maintaining a sufficient population of software engineers to keep it running, or to get it to a particular point.
I read some
Um,
research and I can't remember what it was or where it was from. But that was talking about maintainers. It was interviews with maintainers and they were talking about how they would if they were given money to fix security vulnerabilities, they would fix security vulnerabilities. Um,
mhm.
if they're not funded to do that, they just never think about focusing on security. So I think that it is one of the things that you can help by giving funding to projects. And I would expect that to be especially true in the scientific software space where people are really resource constrained and they only have so much time to work on things.
Yeah, so maybe I can jump in and Greg will probably have somewhat different opinions because he's coming from a different place than I am. But for me, I think I guess I feel like we're typically struggling to try to get time for somebody to do some of the maintenance work. And of that maintenance work, what's important is often what keeps people from using the software. And so
Mhm.
if there's a dependency that changes and there's something that's going to break there, right, that's essential. If something that you're using is no longer going to be supported because it's gone past its life and they've moved on to a new version, right? That's important as well. If you've got a big project that's using your software and they say we need this feature in order to keep using it, then that becomes important. I would say security is probably like pretty far down on the bottom of the list, because if my software is let's say it's computational chemistry software that's doing how a molecule um, basically bonds to another molecule.
Hmm.
I'm not sure what the security issue is that I should be worried about. Because I'm downloading the software, I'm running it on a computer. It's not necessarily using distributed resources or cloud resources. So I don't know. So I feel like kind of there's a little bit of a difference in the software that's more kind of modeling
Hmm.
some cases, and also in just the prioritization of which issues should kind of are the most important to work on. And I mean, I guess, Don, I agree with you that if a project is funded to work on security, it will work on security. But I guess my experience usually is that projects aren't funded to work on anything specifically. They're funded to work on the software, and then it's up to the project to decide how to prioritize the different issues.
Yeah, exactly. And given their prioritization, security is something they almost never prioritize. They always prioritize features and other things.
Right. But I think again, just from the point of view of like the maintainers that I know, it's typically because security isn't actually seen as a major concern.
Mhm.
Um, right. They don't have evidence of security problems that have caused them problems or caused their users problems, where they do have evidence of other things that have caused problems.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, and this isn't really absolute. So, not like on Parcel, we went through a security audit through I can't remember what it's called, but the thing that NSF used to fund at Indiana University that's now kind of moved to be uh, more widespread.
Felt, felt like the giant map of everything.
I mean, so it's basically a service where if you have NSF funding, you can go to them and you can say, can you audit our software and see what our
Uh,
problems are? And so we went through that and they told us about some problems, and one of them was related to dependencies that were too old and that had security problems. One of them was related to some information that we were sending in a non-encrypted way that they said we should send in an encrypted way, which we debate whether that's worth the cost or not, but that's a different issue. So
mhm.
there, so that does happen sometimes, but it's not. I guess I would say that there's not a good resource for that for the large number of software packages that are developed under NSF funding,
Yeah. Like
and
when
there's
yeah,
not a
go ahead.
ton for it either.
I mean, so the kind of examples I'm thinking of as you talk, Dan, are like, for example, when I talk to people at wet labs that are using various bioinformatics or computational biology packages, these packages never have open access on the internet. They're used for one very narrow scientific purpose. And it is like, so security is not a concern, but it's also less of a risk to some extent because this software never like sits on a public server. It's sitting on somebody's workstation, pulling data out of a machine, transforming it into some other form so that the next computer or machine can use it.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple of key points here. Like, one, the primary way to understand if you have a security risk is to identify if you are even at risk, right? Most of these projects will
Mhm.
never be targeted. Their usage profile is also very different. But I
Mhm.
think to the point of if you can use stewarded projects as predictive on the health of those systems, if one of the most predictive factors of getting through the incubation process is security, that's going to
Mhm.
be a mismatch to the profile of those projects.
Right.
I will also say that Matplotlib was the number one most typo squatted open source project. One of those,
Really?
I think it was the 2022. So yeah, it's the vectors that are coming in. So they're going for an upstream vector onto these projects. So it is never that the project itself is at risk, but you are still very much at risk. How many of these projects intake Matplotlib? Um, so I think looking at it from that ecosystem perspective is useful, but that's a bit of a security perspective and will not help with your stats.
Yeah. Well, I'm just curious, so what is so it's because it was a I don't know what AFNI is. What about the that group of projects drove it to care about security more than other research software?
Well, to some degree, because it is used almost exclusively for supercomputing. So
Hmm.
if there is an issue, it is that it's trying to get vectored into a supercomputing system.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
it's a slightly more likely vector, but that is also a very different space. It's possibly an interesting space to include in your research because it is one of, at least at NIH, it is one of the oldest, long-standing, best supported open source projects that they have. So it's had stable releases for decades. So they are just at that point of maturity and usage.
So I was going to comment that one thing that's interesting to me about that is that it is as I look at it, it's an NIH intramural produced software, and a lot of the software that's been around for a long time from NIH is intramural as opposed to being actually done in universities. And so it seems like at least in the past, well, up to the current administration, NIH has been reasonably good at supporting stuff that it developed that it cared about internally, and less good at supporting stuff that it paid for the development of externally. Not necessarily that it's bad compared to other agencies, but just that it wasn't as good as it was for the internal stuff.
So intramural means that like NIH would actually have people build this software because it was useful to across NIH funded projects, Dan. Sorry, I'm not
Yeah,
familiar with.
yeah. So right, NIH has intramural and extramural funding, and it's kind of like DOE that has DOE labs, and then also fund stuff in universities. But
Okay.
NSF is mostly extramural in this sense, with maybe NCAR being an exception.
I think that is exactly correct. So essentially at NIH, if you're at the headquarters in DC, when they're doing medical research, they allow for much higher risk in their profiles than they do for external. But for the open source engagement, that means that all of those software engineers are based in that region, in that office. So extremely mature open source project from that point of view. But the money is the reason why.
I mean, I would almost say that it's sorry, this is going to sound a little bit funny, but it's almost like corporate software in some sense.
Yeah,
Because
supported
there's
much
a
more
committed set of
substantially.
resources dedicated to that over time.
Yeah, those are salaried maintainers.
Hmm.
I have an unrelated question to what we've been talking about. Are you also, so you said you're looking at sandbox incubating and graduated. Are you also looking at archived projects as a part of this process, the ones that get end of lifed?
Yeah, inevitably, because some of the graduated projects we started looking at last year have in fact been archived in the past year. So yeah, inevitably we look at that. Not, I'm not as concerned about automatically classifying those because almost all the time, almost every time, at least in probably 70% of the cases minimum, uh, people turn on the archive bit and archive the repository. So there's like a single binary on the platform that tells us when something is archived. So it's not it like compared to the other three categories, it's easy to spot.
Yeah, but it's part of the life cycle. So
Yes, absolutely. It's definitely part of the life cycle. We haven't tried to automatically classify it because and maybe this is just sort of my mental block, but I look at that archive bit as a cheat code that's so easy that I don't need to bother computationally modeling the archived ones. Perhaps that's misguided or naive. I welcome feedback on that choice. Hmm.
I had a question, Sean. So where are you at with this? And what is your ultimate goal? To have some kind of tool that gives me some sort of indication of where I sit in the landscape of projects, or what's the plan?
Yeah, so the ultimate goal is to be able to provide a tool that allows people with scientific and corporatized projects that are not inside of a rigorous classification scheme that's supported by process to get a rough estimate of where their project sits in terms of sustainability, and also to understand which metrics, to the point that Sal made earlier, which metrics are the most significant predictors. So, like for example, in one of the papers that we're working on that's on xArchive right now, we found a very strong relationship between newcomers, not surprisingly, I think, in a project. So, how many newcomers stick with a project, or what percentage of newcomers stick with a project, has a strong predictive, has strong predictive power for whether or not that, the maturity level of that project. And so we use the CHAOSS newcomer metric, and there's a few others. I could paste a link to that xArchive paper um, in here. And so we're basically working on more significant and rigorously evaluated versions of those models with this goal of, so you could say it's tool production, but I think it's also helping people know, like, if you can only look at five things, what are the five things I might look at with the tools that are available? Um, yeah.
One of the things that we're running into, as part of our metrics development process is that some people don't think that certain metrics are applicable to their projects. So you say, like newcomers, for example. So we have projects who are basically saying, well, we don't think that newcomers is an important metric. We don't want to measure it, and we don't want to be measured against it. Um, and
Hmm.
other projects are like, well, okay, well, we don't mind if you want to measure that, that's fine. Um, but we don't really, we're not that interested in it. And other projects who are like, yeah, we would be interested. So like there's this whole spectrum of different projects and their interest in different metrics. And so to come up with a I don't know, like I mean, originally we were thinking about having, a scorecard or something that would provide some kind of way of doing what you're suggesting. I think, this give telling you where you are on the landscape of sustainability. Um, but it's difficult if people don't think that certain metrics that you might have used in that are even applicable to their project at all. So,
Right.
so there needs to be some way of allowing them to pick the metrics that they think are important. I guess I don't know, but that's one of the discussions that's happened recently. Um, so just a data point, I suppose, for when you're doing this, that a general method for doing this may not be something that people feel is appropriate for their projects.
Yeah, and I think I've seen what you're describing, scientific and research projects not wanting to be evaluated by certain metrics. I've certainly had those conversations, and I think that's why this computational modeling effort is starting first with the corporatized software, because those do in fact look more the same and have a more common set of, for good or ill, the values underlying those projects are pretty similar most of the time. It's profit motive and sustainability related, and there's an expectation of a certain degree of labor investment from different firms in each project. So it's a more consistent space to begin something that's general in. But I agree I see what you're saying um, about research open source projects. And I think the other thing I've seen is there are entities such as, for example, funding organizations that are desperately searching, and Dan and you, I think, already know this, is funding organizations desperately searching for some way to map the research software to a scientific output and the effects of it, right?
Mhm.
And that, I think, for example, when a funder decides that a metric is important, it's likely that a project will then measure the thing the funder cares about, right? And it may, in fact, actually skew the behavior of the project because the funder cares about whatever this small set of metrics is. Um, and so I think from a scientific research perspective, the goal is to try to sort of identify what those useful ones might be. Sorry, Don, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think what Greg said though is really important and doesn't just apply to research and scientific software. I mean, the reality is every open source project is a little bit different. They have different values,
Yes,
different goals.
100%.
So for example, even within the CNCF projects, we had certain governance requirements that projects had to meet at each level, but how
Mhm.
they met them was different for the different projects because they had different needs, they had different structures. There were a host of different governance models that they could choose and then customize based
Right.
on their needs. So even within the corporate environment, there are certain metrics that just really don't apply to particular types of projects or projects with particular goals or values. And so it's not just on the scientific software side. I think it's something that and this is something I talk to people about all the time because people want to apply just like a same set of metrics to all the things. And there are exceptions. There are projects where that's going to make sense, and there are projects where it's just not.
Yeah, I agree. From what the things I guess this way that I've looked at this is, you're right, of course. The corporate space does, if there's like a variance indicator, like the line of best fit in the corporate space has less variance than a conceptual line of best fit in the research open source space, that there is, I think, substantially more variation in research software,
Yeah.
which,
Oh, sorry. Did I cut
no,
you
you
off?
go ahead. I was done. I was just, ma'am, I was sort of, no, I'm done.
I think yeah, so when the like OpenSSF scorecards came out and we started sort of automatically evaluating security baselines, uh, at least across CNCF, that initially was a cultural upset, to say the least. And from there, I got us to do security slams because at that point, if you're going to slam someone with a bunch of information, you must then in turn say that you will assist them with it. So I think that's a really good learning that I've got from open source. And I think it kind of does speak to the utility of this. You may not be able to get a shared baseline across these, so the variability of the predictability of your outcomes might be different. But if it's a little bit of a like wishy-washy metric, the outputs that you could still provide could be incredibly useful. So a
Mhm.
non-prescriptive advisement that offers several different outcomes that say your project might behave this way because of this or this or this. And if it's an academic project that fits a specific profile, they should be able to see that profile in the output that you provide for advisement. I think that would be an incredibly strong way to sort of take this project and know that you might not be able to get those metrics honed quite so closely until you get much more data. In 5 years, might have enough projects to hone that in. But this could still be incredibly useful if you're providing outputs that the end user, those maintainers, could actually lean on and use. And I don't think that needs to be highly prescriptive. It could be very kind overall advisements that they can pick up or leave.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess we're almost out of time, but yeah, I think one of the things I've learned, if not from the work in open source, certainly from AI, if you frame things in a positive way, people receive it better. Um, so we are just about out of time. I don't hope this was an interesting discussion for the rest of you. It was interesting to me, but that it's not the metric of your interest. So, anything else anybody wants to add or add to the agenda for our next call that would be important or interesting?
So Sean, I put in chat. I'm gonna have to leave in just a second. I'm gonna be on vacation in 2 weeks, so I won't be on the next one. But I I mean, I think this is generally interesting discussion, but it's not clear if it's leading to anything. And so I don't know if it should or not either. I don't know if these working groups are kind of try to focus on something and do something, or if it's more just kind of information sharing that's generally useful. But
I mean, I think the goal is to focus on something and do something. So just being interesting is not the goal, um, for
so
what
maybe
that's
in that
worth.
case, it'd be worth kind of talking about what that is that we should be trying to do.
I would like to propose something, and that is
Yeah.
how we can um, create, how we can identify this connection between the science outcomes and the software. So the science, so I don't know if that's interest to this particular group, but
It is.
you know,
Yeah.
this to me is something, as you said, the funding agencies are desperate to know if their software is actually generating, real science, and what the impact of that software is. And uh, I can spend time on doing that because
Mhm.
that's one of the things that CAS has this organization is tasked with trying to figure out. I mean, at the moment, they're just doing it because by uh, just evidence, that the projects, that the sub projects within CAS are, they hear about something, or they've worked with some scientific project and they've generated a paper or something, so they can relate that, and create a highlight or something. But I would like some way of doing it more, automatically if it's possible. And I know there's some efforts going on to, try and uh, collect data and work backwards from, the
Yeah.
publication, to the software that was used to produce it or something like that. But that to me would be a very interesting thing to do.
And let's talk about that next time. Dan and I have been, of course, involved in these discussions with funders directly. And since last September, when we met up in Sweden, I've been working pretty closely with Jonathan Starr, who I think has been on this call before. Try to
Yeah, he was
actually,
on last week, was he? Last time, I think, maybe.
yeah, one of
Yeah.
the most recent times. I think he's been on vacation for the last month or so, but I think he's back now. But yeah, yeah, that would be. I think we'll head right down that path because I think the work that Jonathan's doing to draw that line is quite aligned with the intentions of the work that we just talked about today. So we'll
Mm.
make that the agenda next time. Thanks, everybody. I'm gonna say goodbye since we're 3 minutes over, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Bye.